There's a specific moment you already know, even if you've never put words to it. You did everything the videos told you to do, wrote the gratitude list, closed your eyes and pictured the life, said the affirmation out loud in the mirror, and then you opened your eyes and the bills were still there. The phone still hadn't rung. The room felt exactly the same. Not because you did it wrong, because you were searching in the wrong place, reaching for something out there, when what you needed was already wired inside you, waiting behind a switch you never knew to look for. And here's the part almost nobody warns you about. Finding that switch won't be the hard part. What's hard comes right after. Once it's finally on, you'll need to learn something that has nothing to do with trying harder. The power was never missing. It was always inside you. It just needed to be switched on, like a current running through a wire you didn't even know was there. Today, I'm going to help you find that switch, turn it on, and finally manifest your dream life. Somewhere in the walls of your house, right now, there is a live wire. You can't see it. You've probably never thought about it. And yet if you touch the right point at the right moment, it would answer immediately. Light, heat, sound, motion. The wire isn't waiting for permission. It isn't waiting for you to believe in electricity. It's already carrying the charge all day, every day, whether the lamp in the corner is on or off. The only variable in the entire system is the switch, not the wire, not the power station miles away. Just a small piece of plastic and metal that decides whether the current shows up in the room or stays invisible behind the wall. This is the exact mistake most people make when they go looking for a better life. They assume the power itself is missing, that somewhere out there, in a book, a teacher, a ritual, a lucky break, there's a stronger current than the one running through them right now. So they keep shopping for a bigger power station, when the whole time, the wire was already live. Ernest Holmes spent decades building an entire philosophy, which he called science of mind, around a single insight he tried to say as plainly as language allowed. There is one power in this universe, and every person carries it, not as a gift handed down from far away, but as something closer to identity. Not, I receive power from God. Closer to, I am one of the ways this power shows up in the world. That distinction matters more than it sounds. A cup that receives water is separate from the water. A wave is not separate from the ocean. It is the ocean moving in a particular shape for a particular moment. You are not a cup waiting to be filled. You are a wave that forgot it was made of ocean. Picture yourself, for a second, as a lamp. Not a metaphor you have to strain to hold on to, just a lamp, plugged into a source that never runs out, never gets rationed, never has an outage. The source is the thing people have called God, divine mind, universal intelligence, or simply, the power for good, depending on which century and which language they were born into. The wire is the connection between you and that source, and here is the part almost nobody tells you clearly. That wire was never disconnected. It was installed the moment you existed. You didn't do anything to earn it, and you cannot do anything to lose it. It is permanent in the same unglamorous way that gravity is permanent. What was missing was never the electricity. What was missing was the switch, the place where consciousness, attention, and decision turn invisible current into visible light. And this is where most people quietly give up without realizing it. They keep asking the wire to work harder when the wire was never the problem. They keep begging the source for more when the source was never withholding anything. Nobody sat them down and showed them where the switch actually is, or what it feels like when your hand finally lands on it. You've probably seen this play out somewhere very ordinary. Someone who spent years saying the right opportunity never showed up until the week she quietly decided, without telling anyone, that she was already capable and only needed to start acting like it. And within days, an old contact reached out with the exact opening she'd been waiting for. Nothing about the universe changed that week. What changed is that she stopped waiting for a stronger signal from somewhere out there and let the one already running through her finally reach the surface. Here is what almost nobody tells you about switches. You don't find them by thinking harder. You find them the same way you find a light switch in a dark room you already know. Not by staring into the darkness and hoping the wall reveals its secrets, but by moving your hand along the surface until something under your palm feels different from everything around it. Recognizing that you're wired to a source is the first step, and it matters, but it changes almost nothing on its own. A house wired for electricity that nobody ever turns on is, for all practical purposes, no different from a house with no wiring at all. Consciousness is the hand. Without it moving, the current stays exactly where it's always been, present, patient, and completely unused. So let's actually do this right now, instead of only talking about it. Close your eyes if you're somewhere you can. Take one slow breath in and let it out slower than it came in. Now picture, somewhere just beneath your ribs, a small switch. Not a big dramatic lever, just an ordinary switch, the kind you've flipped 10,000 times without thinking. See your hand reach for it. And as you flip it, imagine warm, golden light beginning to move. Not around you, through you. Starting at your chest and spreading outward through your shoulders, down your arms, into your hands, down through your stomach, your legs, all the way to the soles of your feet, until every part of you is lit from the inside. The way a house lights up room by room when the main power comes on. Now, silently or out loud, say the words that make it real. I am connected. I'm on. Stay there for one more breath, letting those 5 words settle the same way the light did. Notice if anything in your chest feels looser than it did 30 seconds ago. That loosening is not imagination. It is the fastest, most honest signal your nervous system can give you that something real just shifted. None of this asks you to pretend you feel strong when you don't. If money is tight this month, or a relationship isn't going the way you hoped, the goal was never to paper over that with a golden light and a slow breath. The switch doesn't erase what's actually happening in your life. What it interrupts is the story running underneath it, the story that says you have no access to anything else while it's happening. That you're small, stuck, and waiting on rescue. Your old caution, the part of you that learned to expect disappointment before it arrives, isn't a flaw you need to be ashamed of. It kept you safe for a long time, the way keeping a coat zipped against a storm kept you dry. It just isn't the coat you need anymore. This is the exercise Holmes pointed toward again and again, though he never called it a trick or a technique. To him, it was simply remembering on purpose something that was already true. And here is the part most people quietly skip, the part that actually decides whether any of this changes your life or just becomes a nice thing you did once on a Tuesday. This switch does not stay flipped by itself. Think of it less like a light switch and more like a muscle you're teaching to fire on command. The first time you do it, It might feel clumsy, even a little unconvincing. That's not failure. That's simply what it feels like the first 10 times you do anything your body hasn't practiced yet. Do it again tomorrow morning, before you check your phone, before the day has a chance to hand you its usual list of problems. Do it again the moment you notice fear tightening your chest, or doubt talking you out of a decision you already know is right, repeating the same 5 words each time until your hand finds them as fast as it finds the switch itself. One woman who started doing this every morning, right before opening her banking app, said that within 3 weeks, opening that app stopped feeling like bracing for a hit and started feeling like checking the weather. Not because the number changed overnight, because she stopped meeting it as someone powerless. Within days, most people notice the reach for the switch takes less effort. Within weeks, it stops feeling like an exercise and starts feeling like a reflex. The same way your hand no longer thinks about where the switch is in your own bedroom. And once that reflex is in place, once turning the current on stops requiring effort, something else becomes possible. Something Holmes considered the far more interesting half of the whole idea. Because a house with the lights on doesn't just glow, it can finally see what was standing in the room the entire time. You have never seen gravity, not once. You've seen what it does. A cup falling, rain landing, your own body staying on the ground instead of drifting into the ceiling, but the force itself has never been visible to a single human eye. And yet nobody spends their morning wondering whether gravity is going to show up today. You don't test it before getting out of bed. You trust it so completely that the trust itself has become invisible, folded into the background of being alive. That's worth sitting with for a second, because it's the exact relationship you're being asked to build with something far less discussed and every bit as constant, the guidance running underneath your life, whether you've been listening for it or not. Once the switch is on more often than it's off, something starts to change in what you notice, not just in how you feel. A name crosses your mind and, within the hour, that person calls. You take a longer route home for no clear reason and drive past exactly the sign you needed to see. You hesitate before a decision you were sure about, and 2 days later find out that hesitation kept you out of a mess you never saw coming. This isn't random noise. It's a pattern precise enough that serious psychology gave it its own name. Carl Jung spent years studying exactly this pattern and called it synchronicity, meaningful coincidence that doesn't fit inside cause and effect the way a falling cup does, but is real all the same. He wasn't describing magic. He was describing a signal so subtle that most people mistake it for noise simply because they were never taught what to listen for. Take money, since that's usually where people want the clearest proof before they believe any of this. It rarely arrives as a lightning bolt. More often it looks like an idea you almost dismissed while half asleep. A decision you'd been avoiding for months that suddenly feels obvious over coffee, or a person you hadn't spoken to in years reaching out the same week you needed exactly the introduction they could give. None of that requires a miracle. It requires a nervous system calm enough and an attention open enough to actually notice the doorway when it appears instead of walking past it, half distracted by worry. Here is the part that keeps this from turning into wishful thinking. You don't need to understand the mechanism to use the signal, any more than you needed to understand electromagnetism to flip your switch back in the earlier exercise. What you need is a habit of attention, something as small as this. Before your feet hit the floor in the morning, Take 10 seconds to silently ask what you're being guided toward today. Not a demand, not a test, just an open door. Then, somewhere in the middle of your day, when a decision comes up that feels murkier than it should, pause and ask the same question again, out loud if you're alone, silently if you're not. And at night, before sleep, spend 1 minute walking back through the day, looking for the moment something arrived a little too easily, a conversation that happened to land exactly right, a thought that solved something you'd been stuck on for a week. Most people skip this last part, and it's the part that trains the whole system. You cannot recognize a pattern you've never gone looking for. A radio station was always broadcasting in the room, but until you turn the dial with intention, all you hear is static. Not because the signal is weak, but because you never tuned toward it on purpose. Do this for 2 weeks, and something interesting tends to happen. The coincidences don't necessarily increase. Your ability to notice them does. And noticing, it turns out, is most of what guidance was ever asking of you. There is a harder question sitting just underneath all of this, though. One this kind of guidance doesn't answer by itself, and it deserves a real answer instead of a slogan. What happens on the days the sign doesn't come? The decision goes wrong anyway, and the very thing you were afraid of shows up right on schedule, on time, uninvited. Gravity doesn't stop existing because you fell. And there's a very specific way this philosophy treats the fall itself, one that changes what it means the next time your life hands you a problem instead of a sign. Here is the honest answer, and it does not involve pretending the fall didn't hurt. When the sign doesn't come, when the decision goes wrong, when the exact thing you were bracing against finally arrives, none of that means the current stopped, and none of it means you did something wrong. It means you've walked into the part of this philosophy that so many people never get to, because the first part felt so good they stopped there. Every problem you will ever face is not, in itself, the actual problem. Your interpretation of it is doing most of the damage. That's not a slogan, and it isn't asking you to smile through a crisis. It's a mechanical claim about where your attention goes first and what that first move costs you. Picture someone staring at a bank statement that doesn't add up, the same 3 numbers rearranged a dozen different ways, hoping one arrangement will feel less frightening than the last. The natural question in that moment is, why is this happening to me? And it's an understandable question, but notice what it actually does. It points backward at a cause you can no longer change, and it quietly casts you as someone something is being done to. There's a second question sitting right next to the first one, close enough to reach without much effort. What is this situation asking me to build that I haven't built yet? Not a bigger income necessarily. Maybe a plan you've been avoiding writing down. Maybe the nerve to raise a rate you've been underselling for years. Maybe simply the skill of looking directly at a number instead of flinching from it. The event hasn't changed. What changed is which door you're standing in front of. The same shift works on harder ground, a relationship that keeps repeating its worst pattern, a fight that seems to start itself. The old question is, why does this keep happening to me? And it tends to end wherever it always ends, at the same tired conclusion about the other person or about your own bad luck with people. The sturdier question is, what am I being asked to practice here that I haven't practiced yet? Patience that doesn't collapse into resentment, a boundary stated once instead of implied for months, the ability to stay in a hard conversation 3 minutes longer than you used to. None of this requires you to excuse mistreatment or stay somewhere unsafe. It requires you to stop treating every difficulty as proof of your own powerlessness and start treating it as unfinished material with your name already on it. The same reframe holds on the ground that scares people the most: the body, a racing heart at 3 in the morning, a diagnosis that hasn't been confirmed yet, a number on a scale that won't move no matter what you try. The old question is, why is my body doing this to me? And it usually spirals into treating the body like an enemy that turned on you without warning. The sturdier question is, what is my body finally asking me to listen to? Rest you've postponed for years, stress you've been carrying like it's normal, a limit your body started keeping for you because you never would. None of this replaces real medical care, and it was never meant to. It's a different question to carry into the waiting room, one that turns fear into information instead of only dread. There's a very ordinary explanation for part of why this works, and it isn't only philosophical. Dawson Church, whose research looks at how psychological state actually changes the body, found that shifting someone's relationship to a stressor, not removing the stressor, just how threatening it feels, showed up as measurable drops in cortisol and changes in the gene expression tied to the stress response. The body doesn't just feel calmer, it chemically behaves calmer. On top of that, your brain is constantly filtering an ocean of information down to only what matches the question you're already asking. The same mechanism that makes you suddenly notice one car model everywhere the week you're deciding whether to buy one, though nothing in traffic actually changed except your attention. Ask, why is this happening to me? And that filter goes hunting for evidence to support the feeling of powerlessness. Ask, what does this make possible? And the very same filter starts surfacing information it was already picking up and quietly discarding. The contact you forgot you had, the skill you already own but never priced correctly, the option nobody mentioned because you weren't looking in that direction. This is not about forcing a silver lining onto something that genuinely hurts, and it's worth saying plainly, some situations deserve grief before they deserve a lesson, and rushing that order helps no one. What changes is what happens after the grief has had its say, whether you stay facing backward at the cause or turn eventually toward the question of what capacity this is asking you to grow. People who train themselves to ask that second question, even quietly, even imperfectly, tend to report the same strange result. Solutions start arriving faster, not because the universe suddenly softened, but because a mind hunting for opportunity notices 10 things. A mind hunting for blame walks straight past. And once you've stopped asking, why did this happen to me, and started asking, what does this make possible, you're standing right at the edge of the next real skill, the one that turns a wish into something closer to a signal the world can actually respond to. So many people's prayers fail for a strange reason nobody explains to them. They're using the wrong language. You pray in English or Portuguese or whatever words your mouth was raised speaking, and you assume the universe is fluent in the same vocabulary. But the deepest layer of reality doesn't seem to run on words at all. It runs on something closer to image and feeling, the same raw material a dream is built from, or a memory. Long after you've forgotten the sentence someone said to you, but still remember exactly how their voice made your chest feel. If that's true, then a prayer made only of words is like shouting instructions at someone through a wall built from a material that only lets light through. Something arrives. It's just not the message you sent. Neville Goddard spent his career trying to correct exactly this mistake, insisting that imagination isn't decoration for the mind. It's closer to the actual mechanism of creation. That living in vivid inner detail from the feeling of a wish already fulfilled does something words alone cannot. You don't have to accept every claim he made to notice the practical truth underneath it. Thinking about a goal keeps it at arm's length, filed under someday. Seeing it, and more importantly, feeling it as though it's already true, collapses the distance between where you are and where you're going. Physicists studying the smallest scales of matter noticed something oddly similar from a completely different direction. That attention itself seems to shape what settles into a definite state. That convergence, science and contemplation arriving at the same intersection from two completely different roads, is exactly why this practice deserves to be taken seriously, not dismissed as decoration. So let's build one properly, since a vague daydream and a real visualization are not the same tool. Set aside 5 minutes somewhere quiet enough that your shoulders can actually drop. Close your eyes, breathe slower than feels necessary, and choose one specific thing you want. Not a vague better life, something with edges. The job, the relationship, the number in the account, the body that finally feels like an ally instead of a warning system. Now don't just look at it. Walk into the room where it's already happened. Notice what you'd actually see there. The exact light, the exact faces, the exact object in your hand. Notice what you'd hear. A specific sentence someone says to you. The particular tone of relief in your own voice. Notice what you'd feel in your body, not as an idea, but as sensation, warmth in the chest, the loosening in your shoulders that comes only after real relief. Stay inside that scene for the last 30 seconds and simply say thank you, the way you'd thank someone for something that already arrived, not something you're still waiting on. The words matter less than the feeling behind them. The gratitude at the end is what tells your nervous system this scene is already real rather than a future maybe. And your nervous system, unlike your conscious mind, cannot easily tell the difference between a vividly felt memory and a vividly felt imagination, which is exactly why a rehearsed fear can make your hands shake before anything has actually gone wrong, and exactly why a rehearsed joy can start settling your body into confidence before anything has actually arrived. None of this replaces the work of actually applying for the job, having the hard conversation, or making the phone call. Nobody sits in a quiet room for 5 minutes and wakes up with a signed contract on the pillow. What changes is which version of you walks into that phone call, the one already familiar, in the body, with what confidence feels like, or the one still auditioning for a future it has never once let itself fully feel. Do this daily, and something in you starts speaking a language the outer world can finally translate back into events. Not because wishing hard enough bends circumstances to your will, but because a mind that has already lived somewhere calmly, in detail, tends to make decisions and notice openings that a mind still begging from scarcity walks straight past without seeing. Here's a question worth asking honestly. If the switch, the guidance, and the visualization all work, why do so many people practice them for a week, feel a spark, and then quietly drift back to exactly who they were before? The answer isn't that the tools stopped working. It's that a spark isn't the same as a current, and a current only stays on with something most people find embarrassingly unglamorous: repetition at roughly the same time, for roughly 10 minutes on days when nothing dramatic is happening at all. This is the part of the philosophy nobody puts on a highlight reel because there's no dramatic footage of someone quietly doing the same short practice on a Tuesday morning before the coffee's even finished brewing. And yet, that Tuesday morning is where almost the entire result actually gets built. The shape of it is simple enough to remember without writing it down. A few minutes of stillness first, not to empty your mind of every thought, which is a task built to make you feel like you're failing at nothing, but simply to stop reacting to the day for long enough to feel the current underneath it. The same one from the switch, the same wire that was always live. From there, straight into naming 3 things that are actually true right now and actually good, out loud if you can. Specific enough that you can feel them rather than recite them. Not my health, but the exact 10 minutes this morning when your knees didn't ache walking down the stairs. Gratitude aimed at something vague barely moves the needle. Gratitude aimed at something specific rewires the morning. Then, last, one sentence that names the day you're choosing to walk into, said with enough conviction that your own voice believes it before your circumstances have caught up to it yet. 10 minutes. That's the whole ask, and the size of it is the point. Not because bigger wouldn't help, but because a practice too big to sustain gets abandoned by week 2, while a practice small enough to survive a bad morning gets to compound for years. And it doesn't end when you stand up from the chair. The same chosen feeling can ride with you into the inbox that usually makes your stomach drop, into the traffic that usually gets a string of curses out of you, into the phone call you've been dreading all week. Not because the feeling erases the difficulty, but because emotion is the actual fuel this whole system runs on, more than the words you say or the images you hold. A visualization built on hope, followed by 12 hours of low-grade dread, is sending 2 contradictory signals at once, and the dread, being louder and more constant, usually wins. Here's where this gets harder to talk about honestly, and where a lot of teaching in this space quietly lies to people. None of this means forcing a smile over something that's actually breaking your heart. If a relationship ended badly last month, or grief is still sitting in your chest most mornings, gratitude practiced as a mask over that just teaches you to distrust your own inner voice, which is the opposite of what any of this is supposed to build. The emotion underneath your circumstances is data, not a mistake to paper over. What you're being asked to do is something narrower and more honest. Notice the real feeling first. Let it be exactly as loud as it actually is, and then, deliberately, choose one emotion you want to practice returning to today, not instead of the grief alongside it. Maybe it's steadiness. Maybe it's a small, stubborn hope you're not fully sure you believe yet. You don't need the feeling to be total. You need it to be chosen, on purpose, more than once. The way you'd choose to keep walking toward a chair across a room even while your legs are tired. That's the entire secret hiding inside a 10-minute morning. It isn't asking you to feel good all the time. It's asking you to decide deliberately which feeling gets the front seat today, even while the harder ones are still allowed in the car. And the more often you make that choice on purpose, the less it costs you to make it the next time something tries to take the wheel without asking. Though there's still one moment this doesn't prepare you for. The moment you've done everything right and the outcome still refuses to arrive on your schedule. Here's the moment that quietly ends most people's practice, even the ones doing everything right. The switch is on, the mornings are consistent, the visualization is vivid, and the outcome still hasn't shown up on the timeline you privately drew for it. This is where the whole thing usually gets abandoned, not because it failed, but because the next skill required is the opposite of everything that came before it, and nobody warned you that it was coming. Think of someone standing in a river, arms out, trying to physically hold the water still so it arrives downstream exactly the way they pictured. It's exhausting, it's impossible, and worse, it's actually working against the current instead of with it. Now picture the same person simply stepping in and letting the water carry them, not passive, not limp, still swimming, still steering around the rocks they can see coming, but no longer wasting their strength trying to control a current that was always going to move toward the sea whether they fought it or not. That difference between forcing the river to obey a plan and moving with a current that already knows where it's going is what surrender actually means here, and it has nothing to do with giving up. It's worth naming what this isn't because the word gets misused constantly. Surrender is not deciding the outcome doesn't matter to you anymore. It's not passivity dressed up in spiritual language, waiting on a couch for the universe to deliver a check. It's closing your hands around the one thing you can actually control, your attention, your emotional state, your next honest action, and opening them around everything you were never built to control in the first place. The exact date, the exact person, the exact shape the answer arrives in. Most people grip both. The switch works because you learn to grip only the first one. Take someone waiting on a job decision, checking their email 11 times a day, replaying the interview on a loop, trying to will a specific hiring manager toward a specific answer by a specific Friday. That grip doesn't speed anything up. It just makes the waiting louder. The open-handed version of the same week still sends the follow-up email, still prepares for the possibility either way, but stops rehearsing the rejection at 2 a.m. and stops trying to control a decision being made in a room she was never going to be in. Ironically, that's usually the version of her that walks into the next opportunity, whichever one it turns out to be, steady enough to actually notice it. Try this the next time you catch your own hands tightening around an outcome. Close your eyes and picture holding a handful of balloons, one for each worry currently running your nervous system. The bill, the diagnosis, the silence from someone you're waiting to hear from. One at a time, open your fingers and let a balloon go, watching it actually lift and shrink into the sky until it disappears. You're not releasing the desire itself. You're releasing your grip on exactly how and when it has to arrive. There's a specific kind of relief that shows up in the chest right after this. Lighter than the relief of getting what you wanted, because it doesn't depend on getting anything yet. None of this means you stop moving. The version of surrender worth building your life around still sends the email, still makes the call, still shows up to the interview. It just does all of it from an open hand instead of a clenched one, watching for the door that opens sideways instead of the one you were staring at head on. That's usually how the actual door looks anyway. Not the one you expected, arriving exactly when you expected it, but a stranger one, arriving slightly early or slightly late, easy to miss if your eyes are still locked on the door you were trying to force. If any part of this is landing differently than the version of manifestation you've tried before, that's worth paying attention to, because there's more of this current still ahead of us. The part where all of this stops being technique and starts being instinct. If you want to be here when that part unfolds, this channel is where the rest of the river runs, and staying close to it matters more than watching one video and closing the tab, the same way learning one stroke doesn't teach you to swim a river all the way to where it's going. There's a specific kind of nudge almost everyone has felt and almost everyone has learned to override. The pull to call someone for no clear reason, the flicker of unease about a deal that looks fine on paper, the sudden urge to take a different road home. Most people file it under random noise and keep moving because they were raised to trust spreadsheets over sensation. But if the current running through you is real, and if it's actually trying to move you towards something, this is one of the few places it doesn't need a visualization or a 10-minute ritual to reach you. It just speaks, quietly, in a feeling that arrives before the reasoning does. A man once had an unremarkable urge to reach out to a former coworker he hadn't spoken to in 3 years, for no reason he could name, on an ordinary Tuesday with nothing prompting it. He almost didn't send the message, because it felt slightly foolish to text someone out of nowhere. He sent it anyway. That coworker, it turned out, had just been asked by her own company to find someone with his exact, oddly specific skill set for a contract that hadn't even been posted publicly yet. Nothing about that story required a miracle. It required one person willing to act on a feeling with no evidence behind it yet, before the evidence had any reason to exist. This is the part that separates people who talk about intuition from people who actually use it. Hearing the nudge changes nothing by itself. Acting on it is what teaches your own nervous system that the channel is safe to keep using. Ignore it enough times and the volume drops, the way a muscle stops firing once your brain decides it's not worth the energy. Follow it, even imperfectly, even when you get the interpretation slightly wrong and the channel gets clearer, the same way any signal gets easier to read the more often you actually respond to it instead of talking over it. Underneath intuition sits something even more foundational, and it's worth being precise about it instead of romantic. Your dominant thoughts, not your passing ones, function as a kind of instruction set for what you keep noticing, choosing, and building. Not every idle thought that drifts through your head shapes your life. If it did, everyone would be doomed by their worst 3 seconds. It's the thought you return to on autopilot, the belief so familiar you've stopped noticing you're even thinking it, that quietly directs your attention, your decisions, and eventually your circumstances. Someone who has silently rehearsed, "There's never enough" for 20 years doesn't attract scarcity through some mystical penalty. They simply stop noticing the opportunities that don't fit that story, the way a mind primed for danger stops noticing the exits are actually open. The same pattern plays out in relationships. When someone who has quietly rehearsed, "I always end up alone," stops registering the person who's been showing up consistently because consistency doesn't match the story running underneath. This is where affirmations stop being the slightly embarrassing mirror exercise people mock them for and start being what they actually are, a deliberate override, said with enough feeling to compete with 20 years of quieter repetition running in the background. A sentence spoken flatly without conviction barely dents that pattern. The same sentence, spoken while you actually let yourself feel the truth underneath it, starts to compete for the position your old default thought has held uncontested for years. This isn't about repeating a phrase into a mirror 1,000 times hoping arithmetic eventually wins. It's about choosing one sentence that names the person you're actually becoming through everything in this current, connected, guided, capable of building through difficulty instead of collapsing under it, and returning to it with enough feeling, often enough, that it quietly outvotes the older story. Pick one sentence tonight, not 10. One, said like you mean it. At the same moment you already flip your switch each morning. That single repetition, stacked day after day, is what finally turns everything you've learned in this current from something you understood into something you simply are. Go back, for a second, to that room from the very beginning. The one where you'd done everything right and the bills were still there. The phone still hadn't rung. Nothing had changed. Nothing about that room was ever the problem. You were standing in it with the lights off, hand still searching the wrong wall, looking for a power you assumed had to come from somewhere else. It never did. It was already wired into the one place you never thought to check, you. You didn't need a bigger source. You needed the switch, flipped on purpose, often enough that it stopped being an exercise and became who you are when nobody's watching. And the current running through it was never something you earned or built. It was given, the same one Holmes called the One Power, the same one people have called God, Divine Mind, Source, since long before either of you had a name for it. Installed the moment you existed, yours simply because you are here. Guided by something you can't see the same way you trust gravity without needing to see it, willing to read a hard season as material instead of punishment, feeling a wish before you ever get proof it's coming, releasing the grip that was the only thing ever slowing you down and trusting the nudge that shows up before the reasoning does. None of that was ever about becoming someone new. It was about finally stopping the search for a power that was never anywhere but here, and never anyone's to hand you, because it was already yours the moment you were. If any part of this current has already started moving through you differently than it did an hour ago, that's worth more than a comment count or a subscribe button. But stay close anyway, because there's more of this river still ahead of us, and this is where it keeps flowing. Share this with 5 people who are standing in their own dark room right now, still feeling along the wrong wall. And before you go, tell me honestly in the comments what actually shifted while you were watching, not what you think you're supposed to say, what you actually felt in your chest. Tell me, too, what you want this current to illuminate next, because that's exactly where we're headed. You were never waiting for the power to arrive. You were only ever waiting for your own hand to find the switch it was resting on the whole time.